We could potentially have had a larger panel. We have representatives of the Obama campaign and Governor Romney's campaign as well. We did reach out to the others. We're unable to confirm anyone, although I suspect maybe Senator Kanavas thinks we got it about right on the Republican side. So, as I say, the earlier speakers have laid out the policy options. Our goal tonight is try to connect them, and in addition to aligning where various candidates stand on these issues, we also commissioned a poll statewide, and we have our pollster, Mr. Joel Gratz from Forward Strategies, who will lead things off with his findings. Now, this was, as he will tell you, a statewide poll on the 4 topics. So our format for tonight will be Joel will give us the findings on each topic in turn, and our panel will discuss the positions that their respective candidates have taken on it. The bios for each of our speakers are, I hope you got on the way in. I won't take time to read them. Suffice it to say, Senator Kanavas is someone we've gotten to know over the years, learned a lot from, and is now left elected life for other pursuits. Our other speaker, Jason Ray, is someone who I suspect we may hear more from in the years to come. And, of course, our moderator is someone whose job is identified for those of you who, and I'm sure that's everyone, read the editorial page regularly, is to keep the marketplace of ideas well stocked. So hopefully we'll take delivery of some good ideas tonight. Mm-hmm. And with that, I will turn the stage over to Joel Gratz.
So as Doug mentioned, my firm was hired to conduct a survey based upon the 4 topics that there have been programs on recently: immigration, the energy policy, national security, and the trades issues. And so what we did was we conducted a statewide survey of a little bit on our methodology. It was 400 people we surveyed in the state of Wisconsin who are likely voters in the November general election. So these were people, we got their names from the election registration lists, and also asked them about their probability of likelihood to vote in the November election to confirm that these are a good representative sample of who's going to be voting in November. The survey was done at the end of January, early February. And what I'm going to do, we asked 2 questions on each of the 4 topics. So I'll just kind of go through and show you the results for each of the 2 questions on each of the topics, and then turn it over to the panel to talk about it. Since we're getting the Democratic and Republican perspective from the campaigns here, I'll also try to highlight, the slides are going to show you the overall results for each of these questions. But I will also try to highlight from my notes where there are big differences among the people who identify themselves as Democrats or Republicans or independents in our survey, so you can kind of get a sense of where the differences lie in the different parts of the electorate. So the first question, I don't know if you can see the slide all the way in the back, but our first question on federal policy on immigration asked people, please tell me which of the 3 statements I read comes closest to your view about what government policy should be towards undocumented workers already in the United States. And so quite a few of these questions, people were asked to choose from a number of statements to get a sense of where they fell on the policy spectrum. And the options people chose from were, we should send all illegal immigrants back to their home country. You'll see on the slide 18% of respondents agreed with that position more than the others. That kind of the range there was Democrats only 10% agreed with that statement versus 22% for Republicans, and independents lied fairly close to Republicans at 24%. The second option was we should have a guest worker program that allows immigrants to remain in the United States to work, but only for a limited amount of time. 35% chose that as the option that reflected most of their personal opinion. Again, it kind of ranged 23% of Democrats, 48% of Republicans, independents lied right in the middle of that range. And the fourth option was we should allow law-abiding, undocumented immigrants to remain in the country and eventually qualify for U.S. citizenship if they meet certain requirements. That received the largest response. 45% of the likely voters chose that option, a high of 64% of Democrats versus only 29% of Republicans. And again, independents were roughly in the middle at 40%. And then the second question on immigration policy asked about state enforcement of immigration laws. This came up in the last year or so, as you probably recall, where Arizona in particular wanted to take over some of the enforcement of immigration laws. So we asked people, several states have passed or are considering laws that will give the police the power to question people about their legal status in the country and require people to produce documents verifying their status if asked. Do you think state and local governments should have a role in drafting and enforcing immigration laws? And here a large majority, 70% of the respondents agreed with this. Even a majority of Democrats, 51% agreed. Republicans agreed with it 92% of the time. And those opposed were Democrats 45% of the time. Republicans said no to this question only 6% of the time. And again, independents lied fairly close in this case to the overall responses of 70% to 26%. So those were the two questions on immigration we had. I'll let our panel talk about.
Oh, great. Our mics are on, I'm assuming. You can all hear me? Good. Thank you for coming, and thank you to our two panelists, Ted and Jason, for being with us, too. We've enjoyed being a part of the Fireside Forum this year at the Journal Sentinel. We've had, for one thing, we're always looking for great op-eds, and so we had 4 great op-eds from the contributors, and hopefully that helped to contribute to the debate. So we'll start with immigration. The way this will work is it'll be sort of a carousel approach where Joel will come back up then and present a few more findings, and we'll go to the next topic. So I don't think that too many people would disagree that our immigration system is broken. Mm-hmm. The question seems to be, well, what do you do about it? So, Ted, let me start with you. Mm-hmm. And your candidate, sure. Mitt Romney, has had some very strong views on immigration. What are those views, and why does he believe what he believes about that policy?
Well, first of all, thanks, everybody, for coming. It's great to see such a great crowd in the Fireside Lounge. I can tell you that having the fire behind you when it's 52 degrees outside is a little different than you'd anticipated. I'm going to in a minute. Mitt Romney believes very strongly that, like a lot of Republicans, that we're a nation of laws, and that if you're going to be in this country illegally, that you should probably return to your home country and get in line to come into the country legally like everyone else. My grandparents came here from Greece, and they came into this country legally, and they did it by paying attention to the laws and obeying the laws and coming into the country just like a lot of people in this room, your parents and grandparents, did as well. And so what his opinion is very direct. And I saw the question that was asked, and it said, one of the choices was, it was interesting to me. It said, Statement C, we should allow law-abiding, undocumented immigrants to remain in the country and eventually qualify for citizenship. Well, by definition of the question, if you've come into the country without obeying the law, you're not a law-abiding citizen. So we have a little bit of a disagreement about the answer that you would have on the quiz, on the poll. But from my perspective, and I think Governor Romney, his view as well, and I'm going to tell you when I'm speaking on behalf of Governor Romney, because I'll use his own words. I've brought some of his own quotes. But I think the important thing is that the law needs to be followed, and that the governor believes very strongly that we should increase the number of visas for people who are studying in the United States. He believes very strongly that expansion of that visa program is an important part of job creation and opportunity and growth in this country to develop our intellectual capacity as a country, and also to make sure that there is, and I think he uses the phrase, to literally staple a green card to an advanced degree. This idea that if you get an advanced degree at a university in the United States, that our country should staple that green card directly to that diploma so that person can stay here and create and enjoy the liberty that comes with our country. But we all know this, citizenship in our country is a birthright for some and it's earned by others. And I think that has to be respected, and I think that's the position of Governor Romney.
Jason, what about President Obama?
Sure, and thank you for having me tonight. President Obama, I don't know if many people watched his news conference today at noon, but he actually addressed immigration reform as one of the key points right now and said it's a bipartisan issue. But recently it's been approached by just Democrats who actually want to solve this. And I think what we've seen with President Obama is he wants a comprehensive approach, one that we have tough border security, but also one that we can allow people to actually stay here. And when I kind of looked at these answers tonight, what struck me was that less than 1 in 5 people thinks that we should send everybody home. And at one point, I know that Governor Romney actually mentioned that he thought it was unreasonable to send all 11 million undocumented workers back home, but now thinks he should. And as I look at this, I think most Americans, in my opinion, share the position that I have and that most Democrats have, that we have to find a way to make these individuals, I don't want to say necessarily full citizens, but allow them an opportunity for citizenship. Especially those, and you've talked about law-abiding, Senator, but there are young people who came here by no fault of their own who should, I think, be given a chance to stay. And I think that's something that the president has supported, specifically through the DREAM Act, to allow those young people who, by no fault of their own came to this country, are here, an opportunity to stay in this country, be it by serving in the military or by getting a college degree. And that's something that, Governor Romney hasn't supported, but it's something that 85% of Hispanics actually support, and I think a majority of Americans as well.
Ted, what about the path to citizenship idea, and where's the governor on that?
Well, the governor's basically said, look, when you look at the way that the law is today, I think everybody's upset about the current makeup of the law. And I think the reason is because it's unrealistic on a lot of footing. You take a look at our border. Our border security is a massive problem. You really can't get into a debate about immigration until there's a secure border. You secure the border, then suddenly we can start talking about, well, how are we going to create a path for immigrants to come into this country? And I think, there's too much tampering that goes on with it. I think we don't have, and I think Governor Romney has spoken pretty eloquently about this, we don't have a tamper-proof system for making sure that people who are working in the United States are supposed to be in the United States and working here. It's easy to basically kind of skirt around the system so that as you look at different issues relating to employment in the United States, undocumented people are constantly in a process where they're working, they're making money. Some of them are sending a lot of money back home to Mexico if they're from Mexico or from other parts of the world. And what's happening is that we have a tremendous burden that's being placed on certain communities in the United States, whether it's Texas, Arizona, other states, where the social structure is being decayed by a tremendous amount of social services that are being absorbed by the citizenry, while at the same time people aren't paying their fair share into that process. So what's happening is that there's a amount of resentment that's going on in a lot of these communities about people getting the benefits of American citizenship effectively without going through a process of being part of the American community. And that means a legal process as well as, just the process of paying taxes and doing the things that all of us do every day to support our own local communities.
So, Jason, what about that point? Secure the border first, and the unfairness issue that Ted raises. And I've also heard the argument that the undocumented are effectively taking work away from U.S. citizens who would like those jobs.
I think first, the president has made it very clear that border security is a #1 priority. That was the first thing he talked about today when he actually talked about immigration, was that border security needs to be a priority. And he spent more money than his predecessors, I think, actually investing in border security because he knows that that is something that we need to do. But I think as far as we get to that resentment issue, I think the thing that comes to my mind and that I heard people say is you're actually undermining the American workers by not allowing these individuals a path to citizenship. Because what you're actually doing is you're allowing employers to pay them below minimum wage because they may not be on the books. And you're actually hurting those American workers who actually want to make the money. You're actually undermining that system of our American values. And I think that's one of the things, I don't I understand the point about social services and what you're getting at, Senator, but I don't think that's really what Americans are looking at right now. I think they're looking at how can we make sure that these individuals become productive members of our community. And I really think that, David, you mentioned right at the end, and I'm blanking on how you phrased it, and it just escaped me. What your last half of your question was there.
The idea that, I think it was the idea that there are U.S. citizens who would like to do the jobs that the undocumented
And
are
I think a
doing.
lot of these undocumented workers are doing jobs that, frankly, many Americans don't perhaps want. They're doing some of those farm jobs that people don't want. I think, and I'm only speaking for myself here when I say this, but I think that oftentimes we think we're above some of those things. And I think we're seeing people who actually want to work. And, they're, may have an advanced degree somewhere, but have come here and are willing to work in a fast food restaurant, are willing to pick in a field, and are willing to do whatever they can to support their family because they believe that somehow they can be part of the American dream. And I think we as a country need to give them that opportunity. They've come here and they want to be a part of this. And for a lot of them, it's no fault of their own. There are several who have been here for generations and have been contributing, to their local communities. And to up and say to all, 11, 12 million of them, it's time for you to go back to where you came from, that's not acceptable. I think they're here, they're contributing to our society. Let's find a way to make them legal so we can help provide them so that they can help get, the minimum wage jobs and really help bring everybody else up with them.
Ted, is there a consensus in the Republican Party about a path forward on immigration?
Yeah, I think I think the country's actually coming around to a consensus, and I think it's about border security first, and then the second piece is we want a bigger legal immigration system. In other words, we want more legal immigration, and we want to kind of close the loopholes of illegal immigration. I think that's what the nation's really coming around to. Jason mentioned the president. The president had, both houses of the Congress. He had the United States Senate and the House of Representatives for 3 years. And during that period of time, or 2 years rather, and during that period of time could have passed any piece of legislation around illegal immigration he chose to. And spending money is one thing, but trying to change the law so that you are literally creating a framework for more legal immigration, which is where I think the country's moving, is something that I think is on something the president has to take responsibility for, the lack of production in terms of his legislative agenda. So, having served in the legislature for 10 years, I can tell you that presidents and governors, when they have both houses, you have a lot of power to be able to move the ball. And, so we have to be honest about the assessment of what happened and what didn't happen over the course of that period of time.
But
so,
just to be clear, what's Governor Romney's position about the 11 million that are here now?
His position is that people who are here illegally should go back to their home countries and they should re-enter the United States in line, just like everybody else who's waiting in line legally to get back into the country. And that's the position that he took, I believe it was in a debate that I want to say was either in Iowa or New Hampshire, and I can't remember which. But I think it's important for people to understand that, there comes a time when you have to have a decision about what you want to do with a country. And you can't simply say, we choose to obey certain laws and we choose to ignore other laws. We either are a nation of laws or we're not. There is no such thing as we get to pick and choose.
Okay, let's move to Joel on the next topic. Thank you, sir.
So the next part of the survey dealt with developing energy technologies and investment in that part of our infrastructure. And the first question we asked here, and these two questions, I think one interesting thing you'll note is that there's quite a bit of difference in how the same people answered the two questions. So the first question asked people, it kind of gave them a statement first. Supporters of government investment in new energy technologies like wind and solar power say public money is needed to jumpstart innovations that will reduce America's dependence on foreign oil and create new green jobs. Opponents say these investments are a waste of taxpayer dollars since these businesses cannot compete and succeed without government assistance. Which of these positions is closer to your own? And you'll see that the electorate was almost evenly divided between the two, with 49% saying that government investment was necessary to develop cleaner energy solutions, 47% saying the marketplace can produce new technologies without government intervention. And here we had the Democrats and the Republicans very polarized here, almost the exact reverse of each other, that 76% of Democrats chose the first statement to only 18% of them choosing the second. Republicans, it was 20% choosing the first statement, 75% choosing the other one. Exact opposite. And independents then, as you can figure out, were almost evenly divided, 47 to 51. I will note, though, that on this one, women were actually 14% more likely to choose the first statement that government investment was necessary. And that's true of both of these questions, that women were much more likely to choose kind of the government involvement option versus the other option. And then we asked a second question: do you think government policies aimed at fostering the creation of green jobs can make a significant contribution to the improvement of the U.S. economy? So while in the first one we actually had about even people saying government investment was necessary versus just the marketplace, here we had a much larger number who did, though, say that the government involvement can have a contribution to the economy, with 59% choosing saying yes, 35% saying no. Again, we had some fairly broad diversity between the Democrats and the Republicans. 87% of Democrats said yes to only 8% saying no. But on the other end, the Republicans, while they were more of them chose no, it was by not as large a margin on the first one, that a third, 33%, still said yes. The government policies aimed at fostering creation of green jobs can make a contribution to the economy, and then a majority of independents also said yes to produce a fairly strong majority on this question. And again, women were 14% more likely to say yes rather than no.
Oh, great, thank you. So Jason, let me start with you this time. What would the president say is the role of the federal government in creating green jobs?
I think there is a role, but I think when I look at the questions here, and I don't think that government investment isn't necessary to spark innovation. I think the innovation is already there. I think what the president feels the role of the government is, and this is me speaking for myself here, of course, that we need to help foster that innovation, that we need to help foster those creation of those jobs. And I think we've seen that with the American Recovery Act, for example. The president helped create over 200,000 jobs in the clean energy sector alone. That's through 2010. Just through 2010, over 200,000 jobs were created in this country in the clean energy sector. And I think it's important that we do that so we can help preserve what we have here, preserve our natural resources for our future generations, so that those who come after us can still enjoy the lakes and the forests and the things like that that we all have grown up enjoying. And I think, as you kind of look at it, it's our responsibility to do this. And that if we don't, we're going to destroy this country. And that's where the government needs to step in to make sure that we're actually preserving and protecting what we already have.
Ted, same question.
Well, I think this, unfortunately, is the crux of why I think President Obama's administration has failed in a lot of ways on job creation, is because I think they've taken their eye off the ball, which is that we should be incenting private industry to create and do what they do best, which is to invest private capital into companies and to create jobs. And that's what historically the role of private business has been. The government now, in President Obama's model, is front and center in making those investments. I think we all know, and Jason mentioned the stimulus bill. The president invested a couple of $1 billion in some of these kinds of companies. It's basically, companies like Solyndra and Enter1 and some of these other companies. Now, Solyndra lost $500 million of taxpayer dollars. And I would just point out to a couple of things. And this is from investors.com. And this is something, Dave, that you probably read because of your background in business. But it talks about the Obama industrial policy, and it talks about two things. First, it points out that under the Obama program, the Green Jobs program is under investigation. That was a $500 million program where the president basically said he wanted the Labor Department to create tons of jobs. And here's what happened. The Labor Department Inspector General report found that the program has placed 8,000 people in jobs after 17 months, or about 10% of the program's goal. The Inspector General, and this is the President's Labor Department. This is not a Republican-run organization. This is the President's own administration. The Inspector General went on to suggest scrapping the program altogether and returning unspent money to the Treasury. So this notion that we're going to train people in jobs in the green sector has been a failure according to his own Labor Department. In addition to that, the President always points to things like Chevrolet, and he was in Michigan recently raising his fist saying we saved the auto industry and talked about the Chevy Volt as an example. Well, the Chevy Volt last week won European Car of the Year award days after the automaker suspends production. Now, the President said that he wanted to see 1 million electric cars on the road in 3 years. In the month of January, 603 Volts were sold in the United States, 603, and they suspended production. And that's why a company like Enter1 just went bankrupt, is because they make battery technologies for cars like that. There isn't a market for it. The President doesn't understand the connection between what he's trying to do with industrial policy coming out of the White House and how people actually make economic decisions, how they buy things. People buy things because they have value. And just because the President of the United States says we want to have 1 million electric cars on the road doesn't mean people are going to buy them.
But
they
Ted,
just don't see any value in it, and that's why they didn't buy it, and that's why they're stopping production of the car.
Ted, aren't there, to channel President Obama for a second, I think he might argue that there are times or technologies that wouldn't be developed unless the government invested in them, whether through funding research.
I think there's a role for.
So what do you think?
I think there's a role for government in pure research. Okay. I think there's a government role in pure research. In other words, when we're talking about splitting atoms and doing things like that, I think government should be participating. But when you make the transition into saying that the government should now be running companies, or the government should be creating social policy through private business, I think that's where the line gets crossed. And I think you see what happens when that line gets crossed in the United States. What happens are companies like Solyndra. You make a $500 million investment, the money's gone. You make $160 million investment in Enter1, that's gone. You make Beacon Power, $571 million of taxpayer subsidies down the drain. So, I don't understand how people are going to just pass that off as, oh, well, we gave it a shot. That's a matter of significant judgment and lack of judgment by the President that he can run the private economy from the White House.
Jason?
There was one thing you just said there that struck me, and that was subsidies. So one of the things the President did when he was in New Hampshire last week was came out and called for ending the $4 billion of subsidies to the oil industry, which is making record profits in this country. So as we look at these things, we need them to come out and say, no, you don't need that $4 billion in federal money anymore. That if you actually want to survive as an industry, that you can do so on your own. We need to be helping create jobs here in this country. You look at the ethanol industry and the biofuel industry, for example, and you're actually creating family-supporting jobs here in this state. Wisconsin has 9 ethanol plants, for example. Those plants employ anywhere from 100 to 300 some people. Those are jobs that we're creating here, a fuel that we're producing here, energy that we're producing here, and we're ending our dependence on a foreign oil. Sure, there may be some incentives from the government along the way until that industry gets off the ground, but the oil industry is certainly off the ground and doesn't need that $4 billion anymore to go on.
I'll tell you what we'll do, Jace. I will advocate for getting rid of any oil company subsidies if you guys stop spending money on Solyndra. How's that? We'll call it even.
But then I would also wish that Romney would return all the money that he's gotten from those oil executives who have funded these super PACs, like the Koch brothers, who are making their money off these.
In order to be fair, then what the President should do is he should return all the money from all the Silicon Valley executives that own shares in Fiskars and all these other companies that they also got from the federal government because the federal government basically backed their business. Okay, so let's be fair, and if you want to start pointing fingers, be careful because it's going to come right back at you.
But in terms of alternative energy, I just want to pin both of you down a little bit. What do you think the government should be doing in terms of funding alternative energy, and how should it be funding alternative energy? I hear Ted saying basic research, that's okay,
sure,
but don't get into the market.
My opinion on alternative energy, I think it's pretty clear based on what we've learned is that, you can't drive a windmill, right? So, in other words, what that means is that wind and solar are things. I think solar, there's a tremendous amount of upside in solar in this country if it's done correctly and it's done led by the private sector. I think wind power, by virtue of the fact that it's not windy when you need it most, is something that you've got to learn how to store wind power before you're going to be in a position to be able to actually harness it. And we don't have enough, the battery technologies, et cetera, are not strong enough right now to be able to support wind. And I think that there's going to be a tremendous amount of new technology that are coming in energy. And I think that the government should participate in some of the peer research relating to that. But don't tell me that ethanol is a winner, because it's a net energy loser in terms of the entire thing. Plus, I think we've proven that over time, and I think that ethanol, by and large, has been a bit of a boondoggle for Americans' consumers. They were sold a bill of goods on ethanol, and I think, unfortunately,
Jason,
it doesn't fill the bill.
Jason, same question.
Well, I think research, obviously, we need to do to help find that new second generation, the advanced generation of biofuels, for example, is something that we need to do. The president has invested in solar and wind. I know right now off Cape Cod, they're building wind farms that will help power homes out on the East Coast. That's something that we're doing that's helping cut down on our dependence on foreign oil and actually produce jobs here in America. One of the other things the president did when he was in New Hampshire was call for a new renewable fuel standard, which will help cut down on our foreign fossil usage in gasoline. I understand the senator's points with ethanol, but I completely disagree. And I think President Obama has come out and said, you know what, look, we need to find something that's produced here in this country that we can cut down and create family-supporting jobs here. We may not have all the solutions, but it's worth trying, and it's worth investing, and it's worth figuring out what we can do to move this country forward that will also preserve our natural resources here.
Well, we do have natural gas, and we do have oil in this country that can be used in order to bridge if we're going to get to a point where we want to have different kinds of alternative fuels. Nobody's really interested in creating a dirtier environment in this country. I don't care which political party you belong to.
So our next topic we have two questions on national security. And the first one is, national security has traditionally been thought of in terms of military strength. Recently, some people have suggested that in the 21st century, a strong economy and sustainable environment are equally important. Which comes closer to your view? We had, it was, again, very evenly split answers. 49% choosing we should spend less on the military and more on domestic needs, with 45% choosing we need to keep military spending at current or increased levels. I'll note here how close this is, that the margin of error on the survey, I didn't talk about that in their methodology, is just a little bit under 5%. So, people's answers here are within the margin of error and is, very close, evenly divided here. But again, the underlying numbers tell us that 70% of Democrats choose the first answer. Similar, 69% of Republicans choose the second answer, and then with just a bare majority, 50% of independents choose the first answer, that we should spend less on the military and more on domestic needs. The next question, though, will diverge a little bit from this idea I've emphasized about how much there's this division between Democrats and Republicans, and show you where independent attitudes really come into play. And the question was, which of the following do you think represents the biggest threat to the United States' position in the world? And the people chose between economic competition from China and others, reduced capacity of our military, or domestic issues like education and infrastructure. We had 38% of the overall voters choosing competition from China, 12% reduced capacity of our military, and 46% choosing domestic issues like education and infrastructure. And as you probably would not be too surprised to find, Democrats chose the last option 66% of the time. Republicans chose the first option 45%. That was their greatest. But what really stands out here is that 49% of independents chose China as the biggest issue. And this is one of we'll see this in the last couple questions that have to deal with free trade as well, which kind of brings in the idea of China. But that independents, these were the three questions where independents actually chose one of the topics more strongly than Democrats or Republicans did.
Thanks, Joel. So I want to start with actually with one of the questions. I wonder if you could try to answer for your candidates. How do you think they would answer this question? Which of the following do you think represents the biggest threat to the United States' position in the world? If the choices were China, the military, reduced capacity of our military, and domestic issues like education and infrastructure. Jason?
You know, I would think that one, it's twofold, but I think what we need to be doing with that is looking at smarter ways to spend that money. And in particular, I think you look at how to do that defense spending. I think the Pentagon is finding new and innovative ways to actually use that money. You know, naval forces, for example, doing a permanent base in Australia. And other ways that we can be able to cut or use those monies more efficiently so that we can spend more on some of those domestic issues like education. If we really want to compete in a global economy, if we really want to outsmart, if we really want to out-innovate, if we really want to outbuild the rest of the world, the only way that we can do that is by investing here in our own country and providing an education system that can compete with China so that we can have students who are able to perform in some of those, you know, math and science and engineering industries, that we can have the infrastructure in place to thrive as a country. And I think, you know, we can't say that, you know, one is a bigger threat. I think they're both equally important and something that we have to consider.
Ted, what would you say?
Well, you know, I know that Governor Romney is really concerned about China, you know, whether it's on the issues of trade where he's been really tough on the Chinese, thinks that the Chinese are basically dumping products because they've devalued their currency and also because they, you know, continually steal our intellectual property and they've done nothing about it. They continue to spy on the country, our country.
What would Governor Romney do about that?
Well, a couple things. What I think is he would go to the WTO immediately and he would say, look, it's time for us to put sanctions on the Chinese until they finally get into a position where they can literally value the yuan at a rate that's market sensitive. They certainly have not done that. So what happens is their products are a lot less expensive than American products or any other European products. But to your question, David, I mean, I want to directly answer your question, which was, you know, what are the things that Governor Romney sees as threats to the United States? Clearly, he sees Iran as a threat. He sees Iran as a threat immediately because of its potential for creating a nuclear threat, and that he believes that threat is real, and he believes that threat is something that needs to be answered to, and has to be responded to immediately, and that it can't be put off and hopefully dealt with by other people. He thinks the United States needs to take a more active role in trying to create a safer Middle East through making sure that Iran is not nuclear. Second is, I think that he's very concerned about the level of defense spending. If we want to remember back earlier this year, the Congress, when they didn't get the sequestration completed, what basically happened is that now the Congress is scheduled for next January another $500 billion in military cuts over the next 10 years. And this is from Robert Samuelson, who's not exactly a right-wing nut, by the way. And he's talking about an additional, this is an addition, that $500 billion is in addition to $487 billion in defense reductions already in that bill, and earlier cuts ordered by former Defense Secretary Robert Gates include ending the F-22 stealth fighter. My point is that we've got to be very careful what we wish for. If we choose to kind of pull away from our commitments, whether it's maritime commitments as it relates to the Pacific and China, or whether it relates to creating a secure environment with our allies and strengthening our ties to our allies worldwide, we're going to be back into some real battles that are real on a daily basis. That, along with, so the budget, along with China, I think are two things that Governor Romney, in the first 100 days of administration, are going to try to literally create as priorities in his administration. He's got some other things that he's listed on his website. I'm not going to read them, but you're welcome to go to his website so he can explain that.
Jason, any follow-up on that?
I just want to say, I think
We'll open it up to questions then on this topic after that.
President Obama has made national security a top priority, and we've seen him, you know, from, you know, going after Osama bin Laden and bringing him home to others. But I think what we really need to focus on is switching our mentality as a country from a Cold War mentality where we have to be ready to spend money for 2.5, you know, different wars at a time, to one where we're using special forces more strategically, and we're actually using the investment dollars in a more direct, impactful way. I don't think anyone here thinks that national security isn't important. And I will promise you that President Obama, makes national security as one of his highest priorities. But it's how we spend that money. The other issue is I know that, Governor Romney has said that he wants to increase the defense spending. And in the current Budget Control Act, it's set at 3% of the national budget. And I know that, I read that Governor Romney wants to increase that to 4%. While it seems like 1%, it's another $187 billion in 2016 alone. Where is that $187 billion going to come from? Are we going to be cutting from education, from infrastructure here in our own country? Let's use that money, let's use the budget for defense in a much more strategic, logical way that can, keep our country safe, but also help grow so that we can, out-innovate and outbuild the rest of the world.
So our last two questions dealt with trade issues, and the first one has to do with voters' views on NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And the question read, as the U.S. pursues NAFTA-style free trade agreements around the globe, supporters point to increased opportunities for American businesses, while opponents characterize the deals as job killers. On balance, do you think free trade agreements have helped the U.S. economy? And as I mentioned in the last question, this is the trade issue kind of diverges from the other questions in that the two parties there's less division between the two parties or people identified with one party or the other within their answers on this, and there are also particularly strong views of for the independents, even stronger than the partisans on this topic. Overall, 34% of the electorate said yes, free trade has helped the U.S. helped the economy. 51% said no, it has hurt the economy. A majority of both Democrats and independents, 51% of Democrats, and actually 59% of independents chose no, free trade has hurt the U.S. economy. And even 46% of Republicans, which was actually greater than the number who said yes, 46% of Republicans also chose no, free trade has hurt the U.S. economy. And then our second question on trade had to do with tariffs to protect U.S. manufacturers. And the people were asked, some people support placing tariffs on imports to protect U.S. manufacturers. Others are opposed, saying tariff risks starting a trade war and increasing the prices American consumers pay for imported products. Do you support or oppose the use of tariffs to promote the consumption of U.S.-made products? 51% said they support tariffs in this circumstance. 32% said they oppose. Again, numbers very similar to before. 54% of Democrats said they support tariffs, 58% of independents, and the largest share of Republicans, 46%, said they support tariffs compared to 41% opposing it.
Okay, so you guys agree, right? We can all go home.
Good night, everybody.
One of the things that struck me about the numbers that Joel's firm came up with here was the overall top line number, and I think it was 54%, I may have that off by a percentage point or two, said they would favor tariffs. And I wonder what your response would be to that based on the views of your candidates. Jason, let me start with you.
Sure. I think the first thing is our top priority really needs to be putting the conditions in place that can really grow and spur job creation, here in America. And we saw President Obama actually come to Milwaukee, 2-3 weeks ago, to Master Lock, and actually talked about conditions where we can put things in place to actually have, made in the USA stamped in our products. And that should be our top goal. Our top goal should be making sure that we are creating jobs and products here in the United States that we can ship overseas. But the reality of it is that 2/3 of the world's consumers right now are not in the United States. So we need to figure out what conditions those are. We've obviously seen with things like NAFTA, that it wasn't as great as it should be. But we've done new fair or free trade agreements with Korea, Colombia, that have really put in place worker protections. And I think that needs to be our number one priority here, is growing the jobs here, but providing protections for our workers here in the United States within those agreements.
Ted?
Well, I think, we got to remember, we got to be careful because I think our country was basically founded on a trade war, wasn't it? So we have an interesting situation. We lead the world in innovation. So what's our biggest product? We think about stuff and we create. That's our product. We create new products that the rest of the world wants. So if we get into a trade war and the rest of the countries are putting tariffs on our products before they can get into their country, we're gonna cut off our nose to spite our face. We want open markets. We want free markets because what we're betting on as an economy every day when we wake up is that we're going to out-innovate the rest of the world. That's what we're betting on in the private sector every day. That's what I do. I'm in the software business. I know that the intellectual property that we create with our software is better than any in the world. And that's why you have companies like Microsoft and Google and companies like mine as we go through this process. And I can tell you that what we got to be careful about is that I agree that we have to have a really strong model in place for dealing with violators. And I'll use Mitt Romney's own words. He's pretty tough on China, as you know, if you're paying attention to this. He said, look, I will label China as it is, a currency manipulator, and I will go after them for stealing our intellectual property. And they will recognize that if they cheat, there's a price to pay. I certainly don't want a trade war with anybody. We're going to have a trade war, but we can't have a trade surrender either. I mean, the governor is very tough when it comes to thinking about people who are violating the agreements that are in place. And I think that's the most important thing you can do on trade, is you've got to make sure that if there are agreements in place, that everyone has to deal with them fairly. Otherwise, they need to be punished and pay the price for that failure to comply. It's easier if you erect borders around a country economically and say, okay, we're not going to let your products in. We're only going to deal with products from our own. You're going to end up having no trade system that's going to be functioning. And we don't want that. Even the Obama administration has negotiated free trade pacts with places like Colombia and other places because of that. They recognize that you need to have trade partners in order to make the world economy work. And that's, I think, central to commerce in today's modern era.
Oh, we often hear, I'm sorry, Jason,
I want to
go
get back to the point, and I didn't want to do it in the last question, but when you bring up China, I think it's important to know something about Governor Romney's position on China. In his 2010 book, he actually came out and said that it was bad for the nation and bad for our workers to actually enforce the trade laws with China. Shortly after that, before he gave an economic speech where he's now calling for us to actually support these trade laws, he divested $1.5 million of his own money that was invested in China. So I'm kind of trying to figure out where the governor's actually standing on this. I mean, in 2010, he wasn't willing to support these trade laws and said that they were wrong. But then after he got rid of his money, that it was invested after he divested that money, he came back and now said, okay, let's support this. So I'm just trying to figure out, you mentioned where he stands now. What was that change for him along the way?
Well, you got me there, Jason. I don't have any idea what you're talking about as it relates to Governor Romney's investment patterns. I have no idea. He can speak to that. You'd have to ask him that question. I have no idea what his investment patterns were as it relates to China. I would assume because he's a wealthy person that he's invested money in probably half the countries of this world. So,
but why does he say, though, that
Well,
it's
he's
bad
not-
for our workers to encourage us not to enforce those trade laws? In 2010, he said we should not enforce the trade laws with China. And now we come back,
I'm going to need
and
to
now
see something specific that said that he said that. That would be great. I mean, if
it was in his book.
Okay, well, you're going to have to show me where it is in the book. And you also show me the context of where it is in the book. Because just like anything else, there's, you can take quotes and you can take them out of context. I know what his policy is, and I think he's been very clear on it, which is that if China's cheating, the Chinese need to be brought to bear on the cheating. And I think that's very important.
Thanks, Ted. Let me ask you, Jason. Often we hear Democrats say we're in favor of fair trade. What does that mean when they say that?
Yeah.
Fair trade means protecting workers and making sure that workers are protected along the way. And I think that's something that we've seen. I mean, when we look at some of these free trade agreements
Those
that have
side
come
agreements that would...
when we've come through, I mean, things that are passed on a bipartisan basis, I mean, some of those have had worker protections that included support from the UAW and local unions. I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about fair trade, is writing a policy that can make sure that workers are taken care of.
And would Governor Romney support those kind of side
Well, I think
agreements?
it's important to realize, like I said earlier, that the government can't control what labor rates are around the world. We don't control what the Chinese are paying workers The rates of what Chinese workers are earning is going up by virtue of the fact that their economy is growing. But the bottom line is, and that's one of the reasons why, by the way, we're repatriating a lot of our manufacturing over the course of the last year or two, and that's the business that I'm in, is selling software to manufacturers, is that you can repatriate this stuff when, you know, costs of the supply chain rise in other parts of the world and are reduced in this part of the world. So that's what's going on. You know, when you look back to 1990, 92, if you dropped a pebble into the ocean called labor rates, and you saw where the labor rates were the highest in the world, guess where you'd be dropping the pebble? In the upper Midwest of the United States. You know, unions were basically great at creating economic circumstances for their workers. They were so good, they put themselves out of business in a lot of cases. That's how good they were at it. And, you know, so now it's kind of balancing again. We're starting to see a balancing between the productivity that American workers have and the creativity that American workers have, and also what's happening around the world in terms of the costs of supporting a supply chain that's far-flung. So when you balance all those costs, manufacturers, business people make rational decisions. They don't make emotional decisions, and they don't make decisions based on what a politician says. They make it based on whether or not they're going to make any money. That's how they make decisions.
But is there a role for the government? I think one thing Jason's talking about are side agreements that actually protect American workers for trade deals. Is there a role there in the view of the governor?
Well, I think there's going to be a role for
the auto worker or the pots and pans maker in Kewaskum who lost their job when that business moved overseas.
Well, I think what you're basically saying is the government going to guarantee a certain wage for a particular worker? And I would say that those agreements are terrific up until the point is that person loses his job. When that person loses his job, that's not such a good agreement anymore.
Well, with that, our series comes to a close. I'm very happy that you were able to join us tonight. We'll see you at the polls based on your knowledge gained through our hard-earned series. And now I wish you would help me in thanking our panelists, Ted Kanavas, Jason Ray, and Dave Haynes of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.